This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Hey, everybody. I am coming to you today from the land of starting to come out of a kind of womp meh sort of period in my life. It's a really weird transitory time. And that got me to thinking as I started to come out of it more. I needed some time to be in it. And then that means that I was less attentive to things like updating the podcast regularly. And I have not been showing up with very many photos or videos on Instagram stories. And I don't think that's like a problem or anything. I just think it's how I've been following where I gravitate, I guess you could say. It's like I just really feel committed in my life and in my business to doing it all in a way that feels authentic, that feels resonant, that feels sustainable. And I don't know, maybe it's just being in my 40s now and life being different than when I was in my 20s. In my 20s, it would have been like, suck it up, buttercup, and hustle. And now it's more like, okay, let me just take a breather for a minute. But I thought, let me come here and talk about how to turn around a bad day and maybe give all of you a little window into some of the stuff that's been coming up for me, especially because as I've been talking about what I think has gone into me being a little like, whoa, a lot of people have been resonating. And I had posted recently on Instagram a post in which I shared that I had noticed that my pandemic reckoning seems to have come a little later than maybe other people. Like I, hand to God, honest to cheese, I've mostly been okay for the duration of the pandemic. I've been like, okay, this is a really hard time. Courage is required. Let me use my tools. I am not going to get caught in thinking that this is going to be like a lost period of our lives. I am not going to go into catastrophic thinking. I got to double down on like, I got to exercise regularly. I got to reframe ruminative thinking. I need to reach out to my social networks. I need to see where I can contribute. Like these are all good tools. And I've really been doing well. And then interestingly, once I got vaccinated, that was when I had a kind of reckoning, a kind of like, there's some stuff that's been bothering me for a while. And I don't know that I haven't been intentionally avoiding looking at it, but I don't know that I have really, maybe it's one of those things where until you get to the other side of something, you don't start to process it. I don't know, actually. So I'm still processing some of it. So I thought I'd come here today and I'd talk about some things that I do on a regular basis if I notice that I'm starting to have kind of a day that, those days that have like a downward spiral. And then I also thought I'd talk about the larger scope of what I have noticed myself to be in, because maybe you'll relate and maybe you'll go, oh, that's what's going on with me too. So I'm titling this podcast, How to Turn Around a Bad Day. With that having been said, let's put on our critical thinking hats, okay? Because when I'm talking about how to turn around a bad day, I would not want to be misunderstood as minimizing actual clinical depression by saying that these are, here's a few tips and tricks for someone who's struggling with a biochemical issue. So while it's always possible that the ideas that I'm going to discuss in this podcast could help somebody struggling with depression, I am not diagnosing anyone. And I think that someone who is experiencing clinical depression or anxiety is encouraged to seek help from a licensed professional. And when I talk about going through a meh period in my own life, I'm very clear that it was not clinical depression or anxiety that I experienced. Never had any concerns about that. So All right. So having said that, I'll talk a little bit about this like kind of meh feeling. Meh is clearly my adjective of choice to describe this period. And it was coming to with some things like feeling easily annoyed. I was feeling sad, but not sad, meaning that I kind of felt sad, yet I didn't feel like I needed to cry. And then I also did not feel any desire to create. And that is always a big red flag that something is up in my life. Because usually my brain is kind of popping throughout the day with, oh, it'd be cool to write a little something about that, or, oh, I'd like to put that on the podcast, or, I really like that color scheme that somebody's using on Instagram. Is it time for a new visual design for my Instagram layout? I mean, like the creative thing is kind of always happening. Thinking about the human experience and how people process, which I see as creative thinking, that's always pretty much happening, except for this kind of weird space that I've been in more recently that I now thankfully feel myself coming out of. So first I'm going to start by sharing some things that I do to turn around a bad day, like an isolated bad day. If it's just like annoying tech issues, those definitely have a tendency to kind of make my mood plummet. It's so frustrating when there's a tech issue and then the only help you can get on the tech issue is like, here's this very unhelpful wiki of possible issues that don't actually apply to the one I'm experiencing. Can I get an amen on that? It's I'd say it's kind of a rough day. Whenever I notice my kid is having a rough day, I feel that I want her to feel good. And I know, of course, that I can't control that. Same thing with my husband, someone I love, if they're struggling with a health issue. And so these are the things that I do when I notice that I'm having just one day and it's getting a little ruminative and I'm like, okay, I do not want this to spiral. So I kind of already mentioned this, but first thing, and so if you're starting to have a bad day and you're like, ugh, I really don't want it to spiral, I cringe a little bit to mention this because I know people are going to groan, but 100%. Exercise really, really helps. And I want to just say, when I am trying to turn around a bad day, I am aware that that is what I'm doing. So I actually don't feel motivated to exercise the way I do on a day that's just running smoothly. And I, by the way, in case anyone's wondering, I totally used to be one of those people who the idea of exercise was a have to, not a want to. And I didn't want to do it 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.9 times out of 10, if we can pull that in. And then now I have become one of those people because I love CrossFit. I think it's so fun. It's like the adult version of being on a playground and like just throwing shit around and jumping on stuff and hanging off of stuff and all that. I think it's so fun. And exercise as a general rule has just made me feel so good on so many occasions that it's like the new thing I can reach for a lot of times. Like used to be, wasn't having a good day, let me reach for the glass of wine. Now it's like, actually the exercise is going to make me feel a lot better. But on a day that's not going well, I feel the resistance that I don't feel like it, all of that, just like any other human being. So it is a very conscious thing to be going, all right, I'm trying to turn around this day. So I need to make myself do it because we're just talking about 20 minutes or so of just getting into a workout. And I find that it creates a break of some kind between ruminative thoughts about why life happens to suck at the moment. And once that break can happen, then I'm just freed up to think about something else. And I think for me, CrossFit, the intensity of it helps turn off my brain a little bit more because then there's just not, you're in the middle of a CrossFit workout. There's kind of no choice but to just focus and finish the workout. They're really only about 20 minutes long. You can do them without equipment. The workout I actually just did yesterday was, It was push-ups, air squats, and sit-ups. And that was it. It took 10 minutes actually. 20 minutes is sometimes a longer CrossFit workout. And if you don't like that, cool. Well, I've also had success with going for a long walk or just doing some push-ups or, right? There are numerous studies that exist showing positive connections between exercise and alleviation of clinical depression or anxiety symptoms. They're easy to look up if you want to see the research basis for this. So big go-to, exercise. If you made a list of all the things that I could do for general self-care, maintenance, feeling kind of steady in my life, alleviating stress, boosting happiness, and you said, okay, Kate, how about those leafy greens? Okay, Kate, how about this? I mean, exercise would be the thing I would really say has created one of the biggest impacts on my overall stability, I'd say. I'd say my moods were more volatile before I exercised regularly. So that's one thing. If you're having a bad day, get some exercise. You won't feel like it. Do it anyway. Second thing, and I kind of already alluded to this when I talk about the choice to go for exercise, but when I'm having a bad day, to try to keep it from spiraling and getting worse, I try to really pay attention to the impulses to do things that I know aren't going to help. So for instance, when I'm sad or like womp womp, my thoughts turn to having a glass of wine or sugar. I mean, can I just tell you, I had this day not a minute ago, but you know what I mean. And I was at the grocery store and I walked down an aisle and they had all the Little Debbie snack cakes, and something in me that had not had a Little Debbie snack cake since I was, 10 or something, was like, oh, a Little Debbie oatmeal cream pie. Those sound so hot. And it was so interesting because I had not been craving sugar at all. And I normally almost even feel a little like sugar, just, it's like too much or something. But that day, sugar felt like the thing that was going to solve all of life's problems. So what I'm trying to do, and this is, again, it requires conscious intention. Notice that I say try to a lot here because I am not perfect at this. But I pay attention to that. And in fact, what I also do is try to get metacognitive about it, by which I mean observing the observer. So I'll notice my internal dialogue is, ooh, a glass of rosé would be great right now. And then I'll actually think, observing that thought, I'll be observing the observer, and I'll actually think, how interesting. So today's been kind of a stressful day. Suddenly I'm craving alcohol. Interesting to notice that false desire. Hey, Kate, alcohol doesn't solve this. So it's kind of a self-talk, self-coaching thing. I'll do the same thing with sweets. And for sure, I'm not perfect about this, but it has been a helpful practice to consciously and intentionally remind myself that giving into the thing that doesn't actually work, that I know doesn't work, I've been down that path before, that thing won't help. Understanding that is really helpful. And there are a million ways that we all can numb out. I have, in pandemic land, found myself spending an hour on TikTok, which is just like, TikTok always starts out great and you're laughing at the first 3, but honestly, by the time you've been on the app for an hour, you're not getting served up any of the good content anymore. It's numbing out. So it's just trying to notice, okay, and actually have a dialogue with the self. Hey, self, I have an impulse right now to do something that I actually know is not going to help. So how about we don't do that thing today? This is a helpful, nourishing self-talk to give yourself, and it's not tough love. It's not, come on, you jerk, get it together, right? Like you're not talking to yourself in a way that's unkind. All right, so first thing to turn around a bad day, exercise, big go-to for me. Second thing, pay attention to the impulses to do things that I know aren't going to help. Third thing, another big go-to is actually to intentionally seek out, and in my own mind, I frame it up almost as like a joy mission or something, but to intentionally seek to do something really nice for someone else. I actually think of it as, how can I help make someone else's day better? Can I take a chore off of my husband's plate? Can I be extra nice to that person that I see when I'm out walking the dog, beyond just like kind of smiling and saying hello? Can I offer to help someone with something? Because doing that, offering to be helpful to someone else in some way, creates a feeling of connection and of usefulness. I think we all like this feeling, right? Like a feeling of being, I'm connected to this person for this moment. I like feeling useful. And framing it as kind of a joy mission, I think, is it just makes it a little more fun. Like, okay, I'm on a mission today to make someone's life better. I don't know how it's going to happen. Maybe someone is going to be carrying a baby and they're going to drop a baby's sock and I'm going to take it to them. Maybe the wrong mail gets delivered to my house, and instead of just putting it out for the mail person to pick up, I'm going to actually walk it over to my neighbor. Maybe I'm going to tell someone, that color of red looks amazing on you. It really brings out your skin tone. It's just, you look all glowy. Why not? Right? Like, it's a fun thing to do to give someone of yourself. And I think it really helps on a day which is just not going the way you'd like it to. And then fourth, and I've talked about this in other podcast episodes, I'll process out the anger and sadness. And I know I sound bananas when I talk about this, but literally, if I'm really angry, instead of just thinking about the anger, I will scream into a pillow. Instead of just thinking about whatever it is, why I'm feeling sad, I try to consciously cry, to actually sit down, set a timer, and consciously cry, to just express out, process out some of those feelings. Sometimes I think that our feelings don't always need to be intellectualized. Sometimes they just need to be fully and completely felt. So those are the things I do. It's really exercise, noticing my impulses, try to do something helpful for someone else, and then really intentionally process out the actual feelings instead of just intellectualizing them. And 9 times out of 10, those turn around a bad day. 9 times out of 10, those things have been really helpful for me throughout the pandemic. But of course, let's just take with this processing out and just touch on that for a moment. I'm not saying that processing out all feelings means that there's some kind of pivoting against intellectualizing, because actually, I do undergo a process of analysis or intellectualizing when I'm having several bad days, and especially when it gets to like, okay, this is a rough couple of weeks. I start to investigate, like, why? What's going on here? And when I do this, and I invite you to do the same, I take an extreme blank slate approach, by which I mean I actually say to myself, let me just put all the options on the table, even those that I think are really unlikely or probably irrelevant. So if I just go, why? It's like throwing it out there, like, why? Could it be this? Why? Could it be this? Why? Could it be this? If it's one bad day, I'll use these tools. If they don't seem to move the needle, I'll get a good night's sleep and start fresh. But when it gets to be a couple bad days that are adding up into some not great weeks, I start looking for all the possible options on the table. And so I wanted to share what this process has looked like for me as I've kind of done an analysis, a review of what's going on with me with this kind of meh period more recently that I'm coming out of. Because as I started to go, okay, let me just put all the options on the table, even those that are unlikely or irrelevant or probably irrelevant. What's this about? What's this about? What's this about? I began to realize that I had, in essence, fallen into a kind of confirmation bias. Have you ever heard of this before? Confirmation bias. So I'm going to describe, you can look this up, confirmation bias, and see what it is. It's a psychological concept, and I'll describe it as, the way our brain operates is that it seeks and it sees patterns. And this is default, and it's unintentional, and unless something truly novel jumps out at us, we have to be aware of confirmation bias and override it a bit. If you start thinking that the world is X way, or that you are a certain type of person, your brain will be more likely to notice and focus on the things that confirm that the world is X way, or confirm somehow that you are a certain type of person. And the confirmation bias that I had fallen into that was most directly contributing to the meh feeling is the world is an angry place and people are being really mean. And this was not a conscious thought that I was having. I was not literally in my internal dialogue thinking the world is an angry place and people are mean, so much as these little things were adding up. And I was talking to my husband about it today, actually, before recording this podcast. I was saying, like, it's almost kind of like if you're trying to transfer water from one glass to another, you know, you can simply pour it in and then it's like, okay, that's like an avalanche of different things or a one big thing happening. Or you can use a dropper and you can transfer water over to the glass, one dropper full at a time. And I think that the examples and the quote evidence that added up to my confirmation bias that the world is an angry place and people are mean was like a dropper full at a time. So I reflected on this, and in particular, I realized that I had seen over the last year in particular, and recently even, so many examples on social media of people who were just being mean and unkind. And I'm gonna go into this a little bit because when I've talked about this with friends, they've had some light bulb moments that, oh, you know what, I think this is impacting me as well. So see if this is you too. So I kept seeing these examples, incidents of people being intentionally mean, cutting, taking someone down, screaming, judgments. And this is happening on social media. And worse, in many ways, this was sometimes coming from people whose views I would generally have agreed with. And yet I was seeing behavior from them like they're just basically screaming at and insulting people they disagree with, name calling, all the rest. And bearing witness to that, something in my heart was just no. Like that, just no. This is just so awful to be around. Like, even if I'm not partaking in it, even if I don't agree, this is so awful to bear witness to. This is so awful to bear witness to, even if I also feel upset with a person or a politician or whoever who said or did that thing. The viciousness of it, it just started, I don't know, I almost don't even have words because it just feels like this heart tenderness where it has started to feel so antithetical to my own values around integrity or connection or courage. Because particularly, you know, when things get vicious, you can absolutely know that fear is in the room, not courage. When things get vicious, you can absolutely know that. I am not talking about speaking truth to power. I am talking about just absolute knuckle dragging, name calling. Like I want to hit you where it hurts. And sometimes I think we all forget, or culturally we are forgetting, and that is part of the disturbance I think I'm feeling, that in the same ways that being around harmful behaviors in the houses we grew up in can affect us, even if those behaviors aren't directed at us, so can being around harmful behaviors in the media we consume. And I think feeling a kind of despair. And it was not a despair like I again, it was never clinical depression or anything, but there was a kind of despair around seeing people post social media memes like, this is one that always gets me. You can be a nice, kind person who also tells people to fuck off sometimes. And it's like my heart just goes, no, it is not kindness to speak to someone that way. This is adding to the problem. It is making things worse. It is not integrity to operate from that place. It is tearing us all apart. I mean, I truly believe that if we respond to harm with more harmful behaviors, we are colluding with that harm, and eventually we can move from simply exhibiting harmful behavior to actual abuse. And that means we're capable of becoming abusers ourselves when we are not considering how we want to respond and whether that response adds to the harm or creates something better. And to be clear, of course, I would never suggest the opposite, that someone being harmed should just go, well, it's okay. Let me just be sweet and kind, even though someone's harming me. Like, no, I'm not saying that either. Critical thinking is always good, right? Like, just because someone is saying, hey, let's watch how we harm, doesn't mean we're just going, you can never say to people being harmful, stop that. Harm does need to be named. Absolutely. But responding to harmful behavior by essentially hitting back with our own harmful behavior does not work. And if you were ever a child living in a household where two adults were at war with one another, you know what I'm talking about. You know that when you heard those two adults at war with one another and your stomach tightened and your heart started to race, that everything in your soul, even if you were a child, I believe you knew this on some level. This is not love. This is not helping. This is scaring the shit out of me. Please, someone please make these two people stop. If you have ever felt that someone who was in prison did not deserve to be beaten just because they committed a crime, then you understand this fundamental principle that just because someone else has done something harmful does not mean our response should be to create further harm for that person. And by the way, there is a difference between abuse and harm, and in most definitions I've seen, it has to do with power. Abuse happens when someone is in a position of power and when it's extreme or repetitive. So when someone uses power in some way to either strike one intense extreme blow or to chronically and repetitively cause harm to another, this adds up into abuse. And I think one thing happening right now on social media is that many individuals are not thinking about how the collective adds up. Much the way that individuals might think, well, if I put pesticides in my yard, it doesn't really hurt the environment. Or if I don't recycle, it doesn't really matter. But many individuals, all with that behavior, it does add up. So I think on social media, sometimes people think, well, I don't have power. I'm not exercising any power over someone if I give them a piece of my mind because they're a jerk. I'm just one person and I'm going to say what I need to say. And the problem that arises is that when many individuals are collectively then coming together to try to take someone down, this becomes a form of creating harm that turns into abuse. And I just have found it so profoundly disturbing to watch this happening, to really go, is this really what we're doing here? It hurts my heart. So deep breath with that. And I will say too, I have not just been seeing this aggression on social media. I have been living in Texas for the past year, and we have been living through a pandemic, and some rough sides of people have been coming out. I mean, I've been at the grocery store and watched, like, this trips me out, but I've been at the grocery store and watched as two people nearly got into fist fights in the grocery line. I was at the airport recently. I needed to fly to another city, masked up, of course, for a legal matter involving a family member. And I'm standing there at the airport, and this woman came up to me and started screaming at me in the middle of the airport. And her friend is trying to pull her off, like, let it go, let it go. And I'm sitting here like, what? And the woman is screaming at me because she's like, you are not allowed to film people without their permission. And I'm like, what? What? We're standing at what? You were filming me. You were filming me. You didn't have my, what? I have no idea what she's talking about. And then I don't know. I know a lot of people hate Prius drivers, and I am a Prius driver. But let me tell you, there are a lot of people that seem to live near me who drive trucks in Texas that hate Prius drivers. I have lost count of how many times I've been driving over the speed limit in the right-hand lane, and like this big pickup truck gets behind me, starts honking, flashing for me to move out of their way instead of just using the left lane to pass. And then when they do pass me, cutting in really close, like on purpose, like, see, take that. Like there's this weird aggression in the air. And I haven't experienced it anywhere else I've lived. I don't know if it's a Texas thing. I don't know if it's a pandemic thing and everybody's stressed out. I don't know. But aggression, it just seems like it's in the water around mask wearing, around politics, around so many things. And it's been a rough time. So all this to say that as I investigated all the why, like why, blank slate, what could it be, even if it feels irrelevant, what kept coming up was realizing that the environments that I was in the real world, on social media, with certain other people in my life, they were collectively not great environments for me. So, I stopped getting onto Facebook, and in fact, I've hardly been on Facebook at all for the past month or so on my personal account. Instagram, not surfing as much, looking at different relationships and just going, okay, if there are chronic instances where someone's being judgmental towards me, aggressive, I'm not inclined to make sweeping statements like F off when I'm not happy with someone's behavior. But I am going to communicate when something doesn't feel good. And then for myself, mentally hold a boundary where somebody behaving that way, they just don't get as much access to my heart or my interior life. And in a larger scope, my husband and I had been thinking about and talking about, I think we need to move out of Texas. It's been less than a year, but it just isn't feeling like a fit. And in the spring, we decided, yep, time to go. So I'm moving soon. Again, for the second time. For those who are longtime podcast listeners, you know that I left California in 2020 for Texas, and then now we're going to be leaving Texas and going to Colorado. So for me, it came down to what are the environments that don't feel good? And that can consist of online environments, the people in your environment, or the literal environment itself, like the physical space or the weather or the local culture, or what is considered normative behavior within that culture. So I think that when we're seeking to change something that's a bit of a downer that we think is contributing to not feeling great, it's not just that thing has to change. I'm also undertaking looking at myself in relationship to that thing. So for instance, on social media, it's not that I sit back and feel bad until social media changes. Social media might not ever change. It probably won't. But I can look at myself. I can limit my contact with it. I can avoid the bad algorithms by not clicking on the bad news stories. And in some cases, I need to unfollow some accounts where I disagree with how someone's behaving. Even then, though, I'm always trying to look at, okay, I have a judgment about their behavior, and to what degree am I able to just sit with that person being different than I want to be? It's a push-pull. There's no clear-cut answer. You can do the same thing in your own life if you notice that in your environment, people are judgmental. It's like you're not sitting back and getting angry until they change. It's maybe I can extend that person more grace, more understanding for why their behavior is. Maybe I can see if there's anything positive around which we can connect. Maybe I can look at myself and how I judge others. Maybe my judgment of someone else is actually a mirror for something I need to look at. And with my physical environment, it's okay, what do I appreciate? What does feel good? What is within my control? How can I focus on the people who have been really wonderful? And all of that is to acknowledge the fact that there's a confirmation bias present. And I don't want to be caught in my own confirmation bias. I want to be sovereign over my own mind. And I think you want that for yourself too. So that's why I'm giving such a detailed example of what I've recently been walking through and some places I've landed with it. In essence, I try to look at all sides of the equation, not just the sides that feel like they must be true, air quotes, in any one given moment. And that helps pull me out of rumination. And I also look at the things that I might need to put a boundary around. And I also look at the things that are my responsibility to change. Because while we can't always control what we feel or the things that happen during a bad day or a rough period of our lives, what we can control is how we respond. And that, I think, is courageous and powerful. All right, that's today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You know you can continue the work and the fun if you want to. Head on over to yourcourageouslife.com/begin and become a Your Courageous Life subscriber, because as soon as you sign up, you get access to an entire library of worksheets and audios and other bonuses. And of course, you'll be receiving more courage in your inbox. And who wouldn't love that? You can learn more about the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com. You can get the Courage Habit at your local bookseller, on Amazon, wherever you like. We can even connect on social media. I'm on Facebook at Your Courageous Life. So look for facebook.com/Your Courageous Life. And I'm on Instagram as Kate Courageous. And I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. So here's to you using these courageous tools in your life and creating a real ripple effect of good. And again, thanks so much for listening. I love it that you're here.